The following broadcast recounts a story set in an apocalyptic dystopia. As such, this episode contains intense and possibly disturbing subject matter, including the description of serious injury. This show will emphasize themes of panic, fear, and trauma. There may also be sound effects of glitching and static throughout this recording. If you are sensitive to such topics or are affected by scratchy audio, proceed with caution. In addition, this episode also contains mild profanity. Please stay safe and listen with care. That being said, enjoy the show. Hello? Listeners? Can you hear me? Shit. God, okay. Hopefully that should work. I think. Sorry for the audio quality. This is the best I can get right now. I honestly can't tell if I have any signal going at all. I could just be talking to myself. Well, it's worth a shot. If anyone out there, like literally anyone at all, is able to hear me, maybe you'll have the heart to listen. It's been a while, Green Valley. I really hope you can hear me. Hell, I hope you're there at all. Things have been wild recently. Even more than normal. Or, I say normal because it's a helpful turn of phrase, but it's been apparent for a while now that there's no such thing as normal anymore. Everything is always changing. That's what I usually say in the intro, isn't it? Your local source for all the latest news in our ever-eventful world. Eventful is a rather nice way to put it. That's why I put it in a radio intro, but in reality, things seem much more scary than eventful, and this isn't really a proper radio show, at least not right now. This broadcast isn't Redwood Radio, not in the usual sense. This is just me, Redwood. It's a funny play on words, isn't it? The show is called Redwood Radio because of our local redwood trees, but also because of me. First name Red, last name Wood. It fits. It sort of connects everything together. The whole point of the show is to talk about local plant life, and in Green Valley, the redwood trees are just about as local as you can get. It was Ash who thought of the name. She's always been better at that stuff than me. I would have called the show the bi-weekly Green Valley local plant news broadcast. How lame is that? It's good that I have Ash around. Usually when I give the intro, this will be the part where she says hi as well. She, won't be doing that today because she's asleep right now. Yet another reason why this isn't a normal show. She wanted to be here, listeners. Trust me. She'd never want to miss a single show. She loves you all too much to just leave you hanging, but she has got to rest right now. Plus, it's a miracle that I got this set up to work anyways. The generator I'm using right now was being really tricky, and I honestly have no idea how long it's going to stay functional, so I have to take what I can get. I sort of got a broadcast right now, or never, and I don't want to wake Ash up right now. As I said, she needs rest, which would bring me to the first piece of news on our makeshift radio show. As you may have heard, our last broadcast got cut short. Near the end of the show, we received a very unusual audio message from one of Governor Oleander's brand new exterminator droids. It basically told us to stop broadcasting immediately, or else we would be facing some rather unpleasant consequences. We didn't even get a chance to stop the broadcast before one of the exterminators broke into our studio, and God, there's no nice way to put this. It broke into our studio, into our home, and destroyed our belongings, wrecked our equipment, everything. It barged in and grabbed Ash. It threw her aside, like literally threw her, like she was a goddamn ragdoll, and then ripped her audio controls apart. It went straight for the equipment, and when I tried to stop it from wrecking my microphone, it sprayed weed killer in my face. It got in my eyes and in my lungs, so pardon the sore throat, listeners, but I couldn't see and I couldn't breathe. I fell over and I sort of just rolled under the desk by accident, just trying to stop the stinging and get a hold of my surroundings again, and I heard it rip everything apart. Just totally ruin all of our equipment. My ears were ringing from all the banging, and all I could hear was incessant crashing and Ash screaming, and it was all just so... I pulled myself together and I caught my breath just in time, because after the exterminator killed all the plant life that lived on my desk, it started marching back towards Ash. My vision was blurry and I could hardly see a thing, but I managed to spot the generator that had been connected to the now demolished setup. The cord was always fidgety, and this thing had just torn it right apart, so it was rather dangerous. As steadily as I could, I grabbed the cord of the generator and tried to get to my feet. I was shaking so much I could barely move, and I still couldn't see a thing, but I summoned enough strength to lunge forward and shove the thing attached to the generator, the exposed cord, right into the exterminator's back. It got all shocked up and froze right before it was about to hit Ash, but it also burned my hand really badly in the process. With my eyes all blurry and my hand just scorched by blinding pain, all I could think to do was ram my shoulder into the damn thing. I heard it crash to the floor next to me, right as my knees cave in. I'm alright, listeners. I'm doing much better now, really. You don't have to worry about me. Or, well, there's still quite a bit to worry about, but I'm okay. At least physically. My throat's still a bit sore, but my vision is better. I've got my hand all bandaged up, and I have a good ointment for it, so really I'm alright. Ash, on the other hand, hit her head pretty hard when the thing literally threw her across the room, so that's not good. It also managed to crush her ankle before I got to it, so that's not good either. We're still alive, though, and I think we're lucky that it didn't hurt her anymore. Ash is recovering steadily enough, and I guess that right now that's all we can ask for. I can, however, confidently report that Governor Oleander's press release, the one we covered on our last broadcast just before we got attacked, was complete bullshit. These droids are not here to help you. Don't let them get anywhere near you or anything you care about. Stay the hell away. They can and will injure civilians, and you do not want to get involved in that. No matter what any of those messages say, we aren't dangerous. My sister and I aren't a threat to anything. We're kids. Ash is only 14, and I'm still just 18 myself. This monster just attacked 2 unarmed teenagers in their own home. It wasn't just our studio. No, that was literally all we had. The next time that Governor Oleander starts spewing shit about protecting our future, I want you to remember that, okay? My sister can hardly move, and I'm still having trouble breathing after, almost a month later. That's your future, Green Valley. Don't believe a single second of it. We're okay, though. Still alive. Once we pulled ourselves together, I had to wait till my vision cleared up a bit. I started gathering what stuff we could save. That thing ripped up half of our belongings, and we didn't have many belongings to begin with, so it wasn't good. I got our backpacks and gathered some clothes, whatever food we had, the measly stuff that served as medical supplies, really anything that was still intact. All my radio equipment, all my computer stuff and everything was just gone. Everything I'd worked so hard for, I got everything together because obviously we had to move. They knew where we were now, and they must have received some sort of signal when I killed the droid, so I had no doubt that there were more on the way. We couldn't just move yet, though. Ash couldn't walk and her head was all messed up, and that weed killer stuff was making me sick to my stomach. So I sat down, I bandaged my hand, and we sort of just sat there. It's funny, listeners, just how fast everything can change. It really is eventful. I was sitting there on the crappy spring mattress that we used to call a bed, looking around the broken down radio station that we used to call a home, and I realized just how weird all of this is. It's been over a year now since it all happened. It was March of 2030, and it's already May of 2031. I had a moment of self-awareness, almost, sitting there in the studio. I was just trying to pull myself together before we'd have to make an inevitable escape, but I was suddenly acutely aware of the fact that this time, 2 years ago, my biggest concern was whether or not the AV club at my school would be canceled. I was just a normal kid, going to a normal high school, just trying to scrape by in social studies. It was all normal. There actually used to be a normal. I actually remember the exact day it was when things started to change, because I was so caught up in everything else that I barely registered that there was a change beginning. I was presenting my graduation inquiry project that day. You know, the big self-led project you have to do in 12th grade in order to pass. I decided to do it slightly earlier in the year, in March instead of May or June, because I'd been so excited for it that I couldn't wait. I made my own radio, a special all-in-one contraption that could act as a transmitter, receiver, mixer, and audio processor all together. It was a glorious machine, all controlled from one beautiful master control panel. I'd actually been working on it since September, and I'd been hoping to present it in January, but I had to keep reworking components in order to make sure it actually functioned properly. Also, because I'm too ambitious for my own good, I kept adding stuff on as I went. Originally, it was supposed to just be a combination transmitter and receiver, but then I wanted an audio processor too, and I didn't want to use a separate mixer, so yeah, it took until March. That was actually kind of good, because it stopped me from getting restless. The AV club had, unfortunately, been canceled the previous year because the school didn't have enough funding, so I had to use my personal radio project to keep myself occupied. Now that it was finally done, I was actually kind of disappointed that the project was over, but I was also elated that I'd finally finished. It really was a beautiful machine. It was March 14th, 2030, at because it was March 14th, 2030, I was about to say 2 in the afternoon, because that was when I actually presented the project, but no, it sort of began at 6:30 a.m., because I was so excited that I'd woken up half an hour earlier than usual. I didn't want to wake up the rest of my family, so I stayed in my room, checking and rechecking my presentation notes. I memorized everything I was going to say off by heart 1,000,000 times over. I had to present the project to my grad counselor, as well as Mrs. Gladwell, who was the school's electronics teacher, as well as the old head of the AV club. There was absolutely no room for error, or at least that's what I thought back then. I wanted absolutely everything to be perfect. I remember that sometime around 7 or so, after half an hour of practicing, my mom came and checked on me. She saw all my notes sprawled out on the bed, and she laughed. "So precise," she said. "Just don't forget to eat." It's good that she reminded me, because it's very likely that I would have forgotten to eat breakfast otherwise. I started getting myself a piece of toast, just something quick and easy, and my mom turned on the news in the other room. I wasn't really paying attention, I was too focused on everything else, but then my mom called me into the living room and told me to look. The news anchor was halfway through a story about lawns. Lawns as in like the grass in people's front yards. At first, I was confused as to why they were making such a big deal over just a little bit of grass, but apparently this grass had literally grown overnight. In a mere matter of hours, half the grass in the valley had grown to almost a foot tall. Mom was absolutely fascinated. She used to work at a garden store, and she's always adored plants, so to her, this was the news of the century. I still didn't really understand the significance. So what? I thought, it's just a little bit of grass. It's not the end of the world. It's almost sickening to think about it now, just how oblivious I was, how oblivious we all were. It seemed sudden when it happened, but really, a part of me wonders if this was inevitable all along. Anyways, I've sort of gotten sidetracked here. Ash and I were back at the studio, and then I gathered up the supplies. Right, okay. We set off, trying to get away from the studio as soon as possible, because, as I mentioned earlier, it was pretty safe to assume that more exterminators would be on the way. I had to carry Ash on my back the entire way, so we weren't moving very fast, but thankfully we didn't get caught. You know what? Since the location of the old studio has already been exposed, I think it's safe to talk about now. We were on the side of Mount Carter, overlooking the Raritan River. The studio was actually an old radio outpost used by the freighters on the river, but it was abandoned and locked up about 5 years ago when they relocated the outpost. They left behind all the old, broken equipment they hadn't needed anymore, so I came and fixed it. Our location meant that, thankfully, our escape was all downhill, which made it much easier to walk with Ash on my back. We went to somewhere I will not disclose the location of, because people still live there, and I care about those people quite a bit. I can tell you, however, that it was a co-op, a sort of commune thing, a little settlement of gardeners who have found ways to sustain themselves, all in harmony with Mother Nature. Urban farmers and civil engineers, utility technicians, and sanitary experts, all working together to make a life for themselves. It's a beautiful community, really. It's usually where I get all our groceries and supplies. The community has grown. It's gotten much bigger. It's grown over the course of the past year, and now they're almost big enough to be a small town. A very small town, but still. We have friends down there who know us well, specifically Big Russ, who used to be one of the playground supervisors at our old elementary school. The big part was a nickname that Ash dubbed him with when she was very small, and it sort of just stuck. He was always very kind to us and our family, and back when I used to get into fights as a kid, he always made sure that I was okay. When I was little, he'd hold my hand as he walked me to the principal's office. Nowadays, he's a community coordinator at the place which I will not say the name of. After what happened, it seemed like the most logical place to go. I had no doubt that Big Russ would take good care of us. We actually didn't have to wait until we got there, because Big Russ came and found us. We ran into him on one of the roads heading down the mountain, and it was a good thing we did, because I'm not sure if I could have kept going much longer. His son, and my childhood friend, Mike, was there too. Big Russ checked us over to assess all our different injuries, and as soon as he'd given Ash a cold pack from his bag, he just scooped me into the biggest, gentlest bear hug ever. It's a talent, to be able to hold someone so tightly and yet so carefully at the same time. It just feels safe. God, it was exactly what I needed. Apparently they'd been worried because they heard the interruption on our broadcast. They were heading up the mountain to come find us when we ran into them. Big Russ carried Ash the rest of the way to the co-op, and Mike helped to carry the supply bag so that I could have a break. It's here when I have my first piece of news for you, listeners. I'm worried that this might be a little too late, because it's already been almost a month since our last broadcast, but I figure that it's important that you all know anyways. As we were walking the rest of the way to the co-op, Mike spotted something on the side of the road. I'm glad that he did, because with my limited vision, I probably wouldn't have spotted it otherwise, but it was a pile of scrap metal covered in a bunch of green plant mush. I didn't recognize it at first, but upon further inspection, when I looked at the big metal plate that sat in the center, it had a name on it. It was Nellie, our golem, the one who helps guard all the people and plants in our area. They'd sprayed her with their horrible weed killer stuff, and all the plants that helped to hold her limbs together all disintegrated, and she was left as nothing more but a pile of scrap on the floor. It was just cruel. Just nothing but pure evil. Nellie never did anything to anybody. All she wanted was to help people. She was so sweet and so caring. She would never hurt a fly, and I mean that in every way possible. I just cried. I just fell down on the side of the road and cried. How could anyone do this? To destroy something so beautiful, so pure. She was beautiful, listeners. She was made of morning glories and pieces of old appliances. One of her eyes was an old bike light, and the other was a beautiful white and yellow morning glory flower. She used to help bring supplies up the mountain for us, and she used to bring Ash and I little bunches of dandelions. It's all a lie. This isn't for us. It never was. These exterminator droids aren't trying to keep us safe or protect our future. They're just here to ruin and destroy all the things that we hold dear. Our government is just trying to do the exact same thing they've always tried to do. They just want to be in control. They're threatened by Mother Earth because they're scared that they can't control her. They won't even stop to consider the possibility of living together. They won't even consider learning to coexist. So instead, they just destroy. They ruin and kill everything whole and beautiful. Mike literally had to pull me back up to my feet. We had to keep going, so he just placed an arm around my shoulder and practically dragged me along. I insisted that we take a part of her with us, so Mike helped me put her chest plate into one of our backpacks. Ash was asleep the whole time. I'm actually rather grateful for that. She'd fallen asleep almost as soon as she settled into Big Russ's arms. I think it would have been worse if she had seen me cry. Anyways, Russ and Mike took us back to the co-op. We stayed there for a while. Once again, I can't tell you too much because I don't want to put anyone else in danger, but yeah, we stayed there for a while, and they helped us to recover. It was actually really nice. Big Russ's wife and Mike's mom is named Ravneet. She's a nurse, so she was a big help to us. Without her, things could have been a lot worse. We stayed for them for about 3 weeks. It was me, Ash, Mike, Big Russ, Ravneet, and Mike's older brother, Oliver. This community, which I won't say the name or location of, it's not like I don't go there often. Like I said, that's usually where I get all our food and supplies and stuff. I see them all the time, but it still feels like it's been ages since I've actually spent any time with them. I actually got to hang out with Mike for the first time in months. So that was really nice. I didn't realize how much I missed him. I met a lot of new people too. As I mentioned earlier, the community has grown a lot as of late. It was sort of weird because even though I'd never met most of these people, most of them knew me, and most of them were worried about me, all because of Redwood Radio. And well, speaking of Redwood Radio, it soon became clear that it was sorely missed. More and more people started coming to me and asking me about the droids, about the news, about other current events. They weren't trying to bother me or overwhelm me or anything. They were all very nice people with very good intentions, but I quickly realized that without the radio show, no one had any idea what was going on. That's never a good thing, and it's especially not a good thing when a new surge of exterminator droids has just been sent to destroy your homes and livelihoods. I brought it up at the dinner table one night, and Russ and Ravneet sort of did the look thing that parents do when there's something they haven't been telling you. Like, we need to talk to you about this, but we're not sure if we want to talk to you about this. They did that. And Mike did it too, which was even worse. Russ confirmed my fears that without the show, a lot of people have gone without necessary news. Apparently, they didn't want to pressure me into trying to restart too soon because they knew I still had to recover. I told them that I was fine, that my hand was, okay, and my eyes were pretty much back to normal. Russ said that's not what they meant. I was very grateful for the concern, but I knew I had to get the show back on the air soon. Besides, I needed a radio anyways. I've got friends in other parts of the valley I wanted to talk to. Someone in the commune, a really nice fellow named Matt, had a handheld radio that he let me use to contact Ivy, but still, I needed a radio. I asked around, and I talked to Russ a bit more, and we figured that the closest place to find radio equipment was a now-abandoned technical college on the other side of the river. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Red, didn't you just tell us that you had a big, beautiful homemade radio back at your old high school? Why not just go there? Trust me, listeners, I thought the same thing, but, the old radio isn't there anymore. I've tried looking for it before, and it's... No. Our best bet was this technical college. I've been in the area before, and it actually used to be a rather common commute for me back before the overgrowth, but I'd never gone to the college before. I knew I could figure it out, but it'd still be dangerous to go alone. Big Russ offered to come with me, but Ravneet immediately vetoed that idea. Russ is a cornerstone to the community. People are always looking to him to help them solve their problems and work things out. Apparently, when he went to go help me and Ash, even though he was gone for an hour tops, the entire place almost fell to pieces without him. Mike offered to come with me, and even though Ravneet didn't like that idea much either, Russ said it was better than nothing. Ash also insisted on coming with us, which neither Russ or Ravneet liked very much, but at this point, Ash and I refused to be separated, so it was bound to happen. We headed out in the early afternoon, hoping to get to the college, scout things out, and then get back before nightfall. We didn't plan to actually get any equipment. I just wanted to go and see how much stuff there was there, and how much of it was usable. We got across the bridge just fine, and started trying to discern where we were from the instructions. But it quickly proved itself to be a rather difficult task. As most of you listeners probably know by now, there are two kinds of urban areas in Green Valley. The first kind is extremely overgrown, because these areas were the places with the most pollution and artificial matter. They were the biggest targets for Mother Earth's initial takeover. The other kind of urban area is not overgrown at all, because it's constantly being cleansed by exterminator droids. This is where the government is situated, and this is where anyone afraid of Mother Earth chooses to live. I honestly feel really bad for them, stuck eating nothing but artificial foods and overly processed water, being constantly exposed to insane amounts of harmful chemicals. I don't understand how anyone could live like that, but frankly, that's not my place to speak. Due to this odd sort of divide, whenever you go into almost any urban area, you are bound to encounter either hostile plants or hostile people. I'm not sure about you, but I prefer the plants. So, the neighborhood that we were trying to navigate was the first kind of urban area, the really overgrown kind. This meant it looked very different from what it used to look like before, and it was extremely hard to differentiate one place from another. Most of the road signs were either completely covered by foliage or completely gone altogether, so that didn't help either. Not only that, but we had to be extremely cautious walking around anywhere because the plants nearby were testy. These kinds of plants were the most volatile back in the initial overgrowth, and a lot of people got hurt because they didn't know how to handle them. A lot of them are movers, different kinds of vines that can grow and change extremely quickly, and because their usual properties were only enhanced during the overgrowth, they're able to legitimately lash out at humans if need be. Needless to say, we had to be extremely kind and extremely careful. You could practically feel the pent-up anger seething out of the foliage at our feet. Once Ash got tired of walking on her crutches, Mike and I had to take turns carrying her. She's small, so it isn't hard, but we ended up wandering around for hours. Every time we thought we had finally gotten somewhere, it turned out that we were going in circles. It was frustrating, to say the least. Mike was getting anxious because the sun was getting lower in the getting lower in the sky, and I was getting pissed because Mike was getting anxious. I almost lost my temper on him, but whenever I snapped back at him, the plants at my feet started getting agitated, so I really had to watch my tongue, which was hard, to say the least. Right when we were finally about to give up, we stumbled upon something weird. Mike was in the middle of saying that we should start heading home, going on and on about how we need to be back before dinner and Russ would kill us if anything went wrong, when I noticed something and told him to shut up. I said it rather harshly, I admit, and I regret it in hindsight. But this time, no plants got angry at me. That's because there weren't any plants at my feet. All the vines and ferns and moss and foliage had retreated from the ground underneath us. I pointed it out, and sure enough, they had all pulled away. Not because of us, or because of weed killer or anything like that, but because they had all concentrated around a massive green lump just around the corner from us. I'm surprised we didn't notice it earlier, but we were all really tired at that point, so I guess it's fair to cut us some slack. Looking closer, it appeared to be a building, or at least what used to be a building. Right now, it just looked like a mass of green. Instinctively, I started to wander towards it, and of course, Mike called after me to stop. Ash, who had been sleeping on his back up until now, woke up. She looked up right as I turned around. I really, really wanted to be mad at Mike, because first of all, I was tired, and second of all, it was obvious that whatever this thing was, it was important. But the logical side of my brain told me not to be mad at him, because technically, he was right. "We have to get home," he said. "It's getting late. That thing is probably super dangerous. You know what the plants are like around here." Once again, I knew he was right, but that didn't make me like what he was saying. I sort of just stopped and sighed. Ash got off of his back, and I walked back so that I could pass her crutches. She looked really sleepy, and we really did need to get her home, but she was hardly even paying any attention to me or Mike. We sort of kept on bickering, debating about what we should do next, and Ash just kept on staring at the green lump. Eventually, I turned around to ask her what she thought, and she didn't even hear me. She was just staring at the plants. In that hollow, sleepy way that only sick people and very tired toddlers do, she whispered. "They're happy," she said. Mike and I both froze. I asked her what she meant, and Ash nodded towards the big green lump. "The plants," she said. "They're happy." I followed her gaze and looked back at the big green building, and sure enough, upon taking a closer look at the vines, they looked different from the others in the area. They seemed more open, more welcoming, and some of them were even flowering. Just like Ash said, they seemed happy. This time, Mike didn't complain when I stepped forward. These plants didn't get all tangled when I got near, and they didn't try to lash out or grab onto anything either. They just seemed relaxed, almost welcoming. Ash hobbled towards a second, smaller green lump along what was presumably the path towards the building. She called me over to look at it, and when I reached out to touch it, the plants kindly let me brush them aside. It was a sign. It took me a second to brush away the greenery, so that we could actually read it, but it said, it was the garden store that our mom used to work at. South Shore Garden Supplies and Plant Nursery. Everything looked so different now that we didn't even realize where we were, but we used to come here on the bus after school all the time. It was different now, really different, but it was... God, we couldn't help but wonder. Plants like this usually weren't so happy unless they had someone looking after them, so if there was someone inside, then maybe... We didn't even have to discuss it anymore. Ash just simply turned around and told Mike that we were going inside. Obviously, he was still worried, but he bit back his tongue for our sake. Mike is good like that. He just nodded and scooped Ash back up into his arms. Even though these plants were friendly, there were still a lot of them, so it was still tricky to navigate our way through the front door. But after a solid 5 minutes of struggling, we managed to maneuver our way inside. What we found was... well, listeners, there's no other way to describe it other than just beautiful. The whole place was built like a massive greenhouse, and the plants inside had taken to it like a fish to water. Vines covered each and every wall, but they still left enough space for gorgeous ferns, flower bushes, and fig plants to get just as much space and sunlight as they pleased. The golden light of the late afternoon streamed in from the roof above, illuminating every single beautiful leaf. Thanks to the generosity of Mother Earth, all of the small trees that used to be sold as houseplants had now overgrown their pots and soared to the size of real, genuine fruit trees. There was one orange tree in the middle of the place that had grown so large, it was almost unnatural, but, that's kind of ironic. It was so big, it had broken through the glass roof up above. It's probably a good thing that it did, because it meant that even more sunlight could reach the smaller bushes below. A group of little sparrows had settled themselves into the branches of multiple trees, and they chirped at us as we walked in. The entire display was just breathtaking. It's a good thing that I had Mike there to ensure that I didn't get carried away. He gave me a bump on the elbow, just a gentle reminder that we still had to be careful. Slowly, we walked just a little bit deeper into the overgrown garden store. It was so weird, seeing the same place I'd seen thousands of times, just entirely transformed. All the cash registers were now homes to bunches of mosses, and all the shopping carts were just playgrounds for budding flower bushes. We got about a quarter way in, just past where they used to keep the bird feed, when Mike grabbed my arm. He froze and put a finger to his lip, like motioning for me to stop and listen. Ash held on tightly to his shirt as I tried to slow my breathing. I could hardly hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. There was a noise coming from the back of the store, really far away. It took a second to register what it was, and the background chatter of the sparrows made it hard to discern, but it sounded like a woman humming. I looked up at Ash, and she seemed to read my thoughts immediately. I mean, it might have been a bit far-fetched to think that she... But still, we could hope. Ash pulled tighter on Mike's shirt, and Mike tightened his grip on my wrist and gently shook his head as if to say, "No, please, don't do it. Let's get out of here." I, of course, ignored him. I swallowed, and then in my very clearest voice called out a simple, "Hello? Is anybody there?" I remember feeling my stomach drop just as the humming sound stopped. It might have been only a few seconds, but it seemed like that silence stretched on for forever. Finally, another voice called back. "Hello?" It wasn't my mom, but for some reason I was relieved that it wasn't. I'm not sure I could have handled a family reunion right then and there. I shrugged off Mike's grip on my arm, and I took his hand instead, giving him a little squeeze as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." "Hello?" I called again. "Who's there?" This time, someone emerged from the back. A short, squat woman wearing a large pair of rain boots. Despite the fact that she was all the way across the store, I could still see the way that her face lit up when she saw us. "Oh, hello," she said, sounding oddly friendly for someone we'd never met. "It's so good to see you." She started to make her way towards us, carefully stepping over vines and ferns. I looked up at Ash and Mike, who were both just as surprised and confused as I was. Mike loosened his grip on my hands as the tension drained from his shoulders. It was obvious that this woman wasn't a threat. As she approached us, she pulled off a pair of dirty gardening gloves and extended a hand to me. Seeing her more clearly now, she appeared to be somewhere in her late 60s. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled up into a messy bun, and she wore sort of a utility belt that she had customized herself, just chock full of gardening supplies. She took my hand with both of hers and gave me just the warmest smile that I think I've ever seen. Her hands were calloused but warm, and it seemed like everything about her was just as genuine as humanly possible. It caught me totally off guard when she looked at me, looked at Ash, and said, "Oh, you must be Rose's kids." I definitely wasn't expecting that. It felt like a shot right to the heart. I was so used to being known as Red from Redwood Radio. It had been so long since someone had known me as Red, Rose's eldest kid. My mom's kid. And yet, here she was. This oddly kind woman that we had never met. She just kept on going, not even fully realizing what she had just said. "I recognize your voice from the radio. You have such a lovely program. I'm so glad to see that you're all right. I got real worried after the last show got stopped." It took me a second to even register what she was saying, and Mike had to give me a little nudge to snap out of it, but I managed to pull myself together enough to say, "Oh, yeah, thank you. That's very kind." She smiled and looked up at Mike. "Now, I know Red and Ash," she said, "but who might you be, young man?" Mike awkwardly shifted Ash's weight onto his hip and let go of my hand so that he could offer her a handshake. He introduced himself in that awkward, shaky way that he does when he's both very unprepared and very anxious, and the lady just smiled. "Mike," she said. "That's a lovely name. I'm Ayla Zhao. It's so nice of you to visit." She put her hands on her hips and looked around, gazing up at the greenery on the ceiling. "I used to work here, back when this was a store. I was your mother's supervisor. I'm so sorry to hear you got separated." Suddenly, things made a lot more sense, but that also made them a lot more painful, too. I wasn't expecting that. She's very nice, Ayla. She invited us into the back for a cup of tea, which we gratefully accepted because, as you may remember, we were all tired out of our minds. About halfway through our tea, though, we suddenly remembered what time it was, and this time it wasn't just Mike who was panicking about getting home. The sun was, fully setting now, and since we had walked in circles so much, we had legitimately forgotten the way back. Ayla, who I'm convinced might just be an angel, offered that we could stay at her place for the night. We gratefully accepted. Even though it's not usually a good idea to have sleepovers with people that you've just met, we didn't really have any other choice, and Ayla seemed to be just about the most trustworthy person I've ever encountered in my entire life. She drove us back to her house in a truck, which sounds absolutely wild because no one in their right minds has driven a truck since the overgrowth. When she told us to get in and take a seat, all three of us stared at her like we thought she was crazy, and honestly, we did. She explained that she used a kind of special plant-based, eco-friendly fuel, one that worked on regular gasoline engines but wouldn't do any harm to the surrounding organic life. Apparently, it's made by another community on the south side of the river, so there's a bit of news for you listeners. We may be able to actually drive cars again soon. Ayla drove us up the mountainside to a little farmhouse overlooking the valley. There she introduced us to her partner, Curtis, who is a very nice man, as well as a beekeeper. They welcomed us in, fed us an amazing dinner, and gave us a spare room to stay in. It was all rather surreal, if I'm honest. If not for the fact that Mike and Ash remember it too, I could very easily be convinced that it was just a very pleasant hallucination. Their spare bedroom had 2 twin beds, so Ash and I took one while Mike took the other. It's the first time in over a year that I've actually slept in an actual bed, and listeners, let me tell you, it was amazing. I remember very distinctly staring up at the ceiling and wondering how on earth I got there. I try to be ready for just about anything these days. As I said, our world is ever changing, but still, I never imagined this. It seemed so odd and so oddly unfair that while some people can be so unexplainably evil, destroying and hurting and taking whatever they want, at the exact same time, people can be so unexpectedly kind. Ayla didn't owe us anything. She didn't really know us. We were just the kids of an old co-worker of hers, and yet she took us in as if we were her own. It just didn't seem real. It didn't seem real, and it didn't seem fair, and yet it happened. That's the way it is, listeners. I think I'm going to take back what I said earlier. Eventful doesn't always mean terrifying, and change isn't always scary. Well, it is. Even good changes are scary because change is scary to deal with, but that doesn't mean it's bad. There is a lot of very, very bad stuff going on right now, and a lot of very evil people doing it. But there's also a lot of good people doing good things. Big Russ and Ravneet, and Mike and Oliver, Ayla and Curtis, and you, listener. You listened. You listened to this show, and you listened to what I had to say, even though you don't owe me anything. There's something beautiful about that, I think. That's good. As you may have gathered, I did eventually manage to find some working radio equipment, even if it's not, state of the art. It works. I'm really happy to be back again, listeners, and I look forward to bringing you more news in the near future. Obviously, this time around, I won't be giving any information as to our whereabouts, especially not the name of our local golem. We're going to be much more careful from now on. For now, listeners, I wish you the best. I wish the best for all of you as you go about your lives in this ever-changing, ever-eventful world, throughout all the bad and within all the good. I hope you're okay, and I hope I am too. Until next time, I'm your host, Red, and this has been Redwood Radio.